So these two principles, unconditionally loving our children and teaching them to respect authority, we feel are the overarching parenting principles that will cover everything. They're an umbrella over which all the rest of parenting application and principles will fall. Respect for authority, huge. We live in times where respect for any authority is really not being taught to our children, and that's because the generations of the 20 and 30-year-olds among us weren't taught by their parents because it became unpopular to enforce respect for authority somewhere around the 60s and 70s in our culture. No surprise, really, that list that the public school teachers compiled looks like it looks today, because we were reaping the results of children who have been raised without respect for authority. Part of the reason this is so critical for our children is because God commands it. He commands children to obey their parents. So it's Scripture. It's not our idea. It's God's idea. And why is that? Because when we teach children to obey us as their parents, their God-appointed authority, we create in them hearts which by God's grace will ultimately respond to and respect His authority, which is what our heart for our children is. That someday they are going to stand before the God of this universe and say, yes, I want you to be the Lord of my life. If they are not taught to respect authority when they are children, they will have a very, very hard time ever submitting to the authority of God. And again, we see that just in spades in the culture in which we live, where there's no respect for God-ordained principles on many, many levels of our society. This is something we can't miss on. Teaching our children to respect to and to respond to authority is something we cannot miss on. It's not one of those, well, we got 2 out of 3 and we just missed it on the authority piece. This authority piece is very central to everything else that's going to happen in your parenting and in your children's life. I remember clearly one of those watershed moments in our lives when our middle daughter was 6 and she was in, I guess it was kindergarten. I get a call from her. We lived in the small town of Avalon on Catalina Island. We lived just about 1.5 miles from the school. And I get a call from her and she said, Mommy, I forgot my library book. Would you please bring it? Lisa was a very, very responsible child. She had never forgotten her library book before. So I didn't think two things of it. I just thought, well, sure, I'll do that. Get in the golf cart, drive up to school. As I am emerging from the golf cart and moving towards the library, I can see in the distance Lisa sitting on the steps of the library with her head in her hands, and I can see her teacher striding towards me. And her teacher said, I need to talk to you before you go and talk to Lisa. She said, Lisa defied me by calling you today. So you cannot bring her that library book, and she cannot check one out today. So I was very surprised by this interchange because Lisa, as a child, very much who wanted to please, was very easy to train and to raise because she just had a heart for doing the right thing. So I went over to this little sobbing heap on the steps of the library to ask her what had happened. And after she got out the I hate my teacher tirade, I said, well, honey, just tell me what happened. And she said, well, I said, Lisa, did the teacher tell you couldn't call or not? And she said, well, yes, she told us we couldn't call, but Mommy, you don't understand. She said, she was talking to all the children who were forgetting their books every week. Because today, when she said, how many of you forgot your library books, a lot of hands went up, and a lot of those children never bring their library books back. So she said, you cannot go and call your mothers today to get your library book. But Mommy, I've never forgotten my library book before. So I didn't think she was talking to me. Now, I don't think this is just sophisticated rationalization. I think she sincerely thought. That's exactly how she interpreted it. So I said, well, honey, I understand why you were a little bit confused, but the reality is that she said you could not call, and you called, so you were disobedient to the teacher. So you actually need to go in and apologize to her, and you obviously can't check out a book today because I cannot give you this book. Well, that launched a whole new set of tears and a whole new reason why she didn't like this teacher. We sat there on the library steps for probably a half an hour before Lisa was calmed down, composed enough. I prayed with her. She went in and she talked to her teacher. She apologized. The reason I say I feel that was a watershed moment for Lisa was she left that experience knowing that the authority in her life, whether it was ours or her teachers, needed to be obeyed regardless of how she wanted to interpret a given situation.